Hi everybody, this is Warren Herman, and today I'm going to make a video that we're going to call the marriage of East and West. In today's culture, there's a lot of exchange of ideas. There's exposure to the experiences and philosophies of varying faiths, and this can lead us to have a variety of experiences in our lives, and can lead us to this place where we have to make sense of how our experiences fit together. There's all different reasons why this may happen. For example, there could be interactions between people of different faiths, and their experiences can be different, and their outlook can be different, and there has to be a way of making sense of this. Or even an individual person. There's experiences someone may have while practicing one faith and then transitioning into another. And so it becomes necessary just to make sense of our human experience, and also to share the experiences that we've had with others and any benefits that we've had with other people. It becomes necessary to have an understanding of how our experiences fit together, especially when we've had different experiences in different religious or spiritual contexts. So we have to have a language, we have to have an understanding, and we have to have something that gives us a sense of the truth of the matter, rather than just simply just kind of some kind of pat answer that gives us, brings us some kind of false closure to the questions of how everything fits together. And it also should be that the understandings we have help us to live and share the goodness of what we have found. That the answers that we find are not merely just something to kind of bring intellectual closure, but give us a way of living in true love for the divine and for other people. So, how can we think about this? So what we're going to do today is we're going to use two religious traditions and think about how they can be married, so to speak. We're going to talk about, I'm going to use things from the Eastern religions. Specifically, I'm going to focus on Hinduism, and I'm going to then speak also about the Christian faith, and I'm going to use my own experience in Catholicism to speak about that, and to use these two traditions to kind of speak about what the human experience is like, and how we can learn about the human experience through this kind of comparing and contrasting, and even learning some more things about ourselves through this, and then that will enable us to get our bearings between what we might call, like, how do we understand how a Christian faith can fit in what's happening in something like the Hindu faith. And so just so you understand my background, I practiced Eastern religions to some degree, not maybe in a formal degree. I didn't formally join anything, but I was interested in Eastern religions, and informally was involved with them for most of my early life, and most of my young adulthood, those type of things, and eventually now I practice Catholicism. So I have kind of experience on both sides there. That's where some of these ideas will come from. So I want to share, first of all, let's get an understanding of the territory that we are experiencing, because today in our society there is this deep hunger for meditation, which is expressed in, it's been going on since the 60s. We've seen these infusions into our society of varying techniques such as transcendental meditation, and then eventually, now today, the big fad or the big draw in the meditation landscape is the practice of mindfulness. And so those are some of our doorways into these kind of Eastern philosophies and Eastern religions in our modern society. And these things influence the practice of varying disciplines, such as mental health counseling and therapy, even medical care, because there is a lot of research and a lot of focus given to these disciplines and a lot of research being done on what meditation is and how it works. And so this understanding, this interest in meditation, it highlights a lot of the ways of practicing the spiritual life. And so one thing that's interesting here is that a lot of people grow up in a Western tradition, and they don't seem to, they seem to see they tend to usually feel that things have been kind of shoved down their throat. And they tend, in the Western traditions, to have missed out on a deeper description, a deeper understanding, and a deeply dynamic interior practice of the faith. They can feel sometimes that they have been given a set of ideas, and even worse than that, they can feel that they've been given a set of myths that they just don't know why there is any belief in some myths, and they just don't know why or what religion is about, because it seems to be about having some beliefs that are hard to believe and rules that are hard to follow, and it seems to it seems to kind of make trouble in family life or society or these things. So a lot of times people, when they enter into they grow up in the Christian tradition, that's kind of their experience, and they tend to, unfortunately, not find much depth in the practice of their faith, and so that's unfortunately a very big problem. And then, in contrast, when they hear how to meditate, when they hear things about mindfulness and mantras and these type of things, they find an ability to make sense of themselves, their life, and an ability to experience peace and stillness and experience personal growth. And so there's this sense that there's almost often in our culture, there's a sense almost of a psychological superiority to for the Eastern religions over the Western ones, because it seems like there's a lot of this. This is the way it seems, I think, to most people, is a lot of external things in the West and a lot of internal things in the East, and the West really doesn't seem to have much to offer, is the sense I feel that people sometimes get. And so the problem is really that in this analogy, we end up comparing apples to oranges, because essentially we're comparing Eastern approaches that have been that actually are very clear and well packaged and are being explained in an accessible way, especially even for a Western audience and also just for anybody, to traditions where the techniques or the approaches or the practices are usually not as clear in how they are transformative, and usually are not as obviously accessible. Like, so for example, if you look up on the internet how mantras, if you look up mindfulness, if you look up varying forms of meditation from the East, you will find resources. Very few people know about Lectio Divina. Very few people know about mental prayer. Very few people have heard of the prayer of the heart as the Jesus prayer tradition in the Eastern churches. Most people have not heard of these things, and the explanations of how to do these things are not packaged the same way. So we have, on one hand, we have this kind of very easily, popularly accessible experience of Eastern spirituality in our culture, and then we have this other problem where we have this kind of fact that we really that unless you dig for it, you can't really find how to do these things in a Western context, and usually there aren't that many people who are doing it. The other thing to remember is that obviously in Eastern countries, most people are just normal people. So I feel like, and I've heard this said, I had a friend in high school. They were they were from India, and they were fascinated by Western religions because it was something new. It's always this fascination. We usually have this sense of our traditions of our own culture seem boring and kind of bound up with the things that our parents or our culture are doing, and they just don't seem very interesting. And there's always the sense that those other traditions are much more fascinating. And so, moving along from this concept, we can see that we really have to compare apples to apples, so to speak. We have to say, okay, we have to say um, how do we understand these two traditions, um, you know, as real transformative traditions, not just on a superficial level? And also, how can these traditions speak to each other? And how can these things bring us to a deeper understanding of the truth that we would not come to if we did not have this dialogue between them? I think what's deeply important is that the Eastern traditions and their prevalence in our society are pulling us to understand the interior life. They are making us have to understand these things. And so I really want to speak now about how we can understand the experience of the Eastern meditations and the Western meditations in a way that is respectful of both, but has a sense of something to say that's critical of both. And I think that has some praise. And I think that the praise for the Eastern meditation would be that there is the practice of some interior discipline, and that there is that human striving for that transformation. And that is something there's a goodness in that people want to engage with their interior experience, and an understanding that we have to go beyond the superficial in our lives. And I think that this way in which it is deeply accessible in our culture is really important. And that's something to be praised. And I think the thing that I would say would be then, I'm going to explain how all these things fit together. The thing that I would say then is that I believe, though, that there is even more to the experience of meditation than we get in the Eastern practices. I think there's more that we can have that will be drawn out in dialogue with the Christian tradition. And the thing here is, though, what the Eastern traditions are then saying to us is that they are saying that we must go within. And they are reminding Christians of the fact that their religion is a religion of transformation, that they must be able to speak with the articulate. And the thing is that the Christians have failed to speak to our culture with with the message of true transformation. We have failed to transmit our spirituality. We have failed to transmit our depth. We have not made an adequate response. We have not understood our tradition in a way that we can speak clearly what we are saying in contrast to what is being said in an Eastern meditation. We have not been able to do that. And so that is a failing on our part. And we must be able to speak our message in dialogue with the messages of our culture. And we must be able to speak our message with and in a way that shares that, in a way that it honors what is good and human, and it honors what those things are that are going on in the Eastern tradition, and shows the riches that can be shared from the Christian perspective, and enables us to find a way of understanding this territory. And so there is this. So that's now let's go into what is happening in. So let's go into what's happening in Eastern meditation, and we're going to use the lens of the Hindu faith. Now, first of all, we want to remember that there is this sense in which Hinduism, in some way, is, this is something that we would speak about, back in the day when I was, in college. One of the things I wanted to do was be a professor of comparative religion. And so they spoke about, how Hinduism is largely a Western construct. That, there's a variety of religious expression, on the Indian subcontinent. And, it's just kind of this kind of label of Hinduism. There's many traditions in Hinduism. There's many veins of spirituality. So, for example, there are traditions which focus on the god Shiva. There's also traditions that focus on the god Vishnu. So there's a lot of there's a lot of differences in terms of religious expression, and then there's also varying levels of everyone has in any faith. I mean, everyone has their own levels of understanding. For example, one of my professors would speak about he would go and interact with forest dwellers in India, who were called the Adivasi people, and he would go and they would be making sacrifices and so on and so forth, and he'd say like everybody has a different understanding. Like, so somebody may have an understanding where they're thinking, okay, I'm worshiping this God, and this God represents the transcendent that is in all things. And somebody else may simply say, okay, this is the deity. This is the deity and they may have a different understanding. So saying, okay, like somebody may be feeling, okay, I believe in this, like I believe in Ganesh, and you believe in Krishna. They may be very kind of more exclusive. Whereas somebody may say, okay, well, these are all labels for one God. There are also varying traditions philosophically in Hinduism, such as like there's different schools of spiritual thought, such as Advaita Vedanta, which is about that everything is one, it's non-duality, that we are one with the divine, and then that all the expressions of God are even all one. And then there's also other traditions which may have more of a personal approach, such as, is really having more of a that type of a thing. Those are some different traditions, especially, I've heard more of those in the traditions focusing on Vishnu, especially focusing on the incarnation Krishna. So there's a lot of different of spiritual and philosophical and theological variety within Hinduism. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to talk about this in a much simpler way, and to really think about the human person as a way of getting at this distinction between these faiths. And so one thing to remember is that especially in popular spirituality today, there is a deep understanding that we are to live in the present moment, and a deep understand and a sense that we are called to leave behind a false self, an ego. And this is very in line with the Hindu understanding, especially the Advaita Vedanta tradition, that calls us to let go of the false sense of self and to realize the self. And so it's very important for us to come to an understanding of what this is all about, because in our lives are often very burdensome and very stressful. And so in modern society, many people feel called to find more peace. And so they turn, understandably, to the meditation techniques that are available that promise this. And so when somebody practices a meditation, let's say they are repeating a mantra in the Hindu tradition, often there is a sense also in the Hindu tradition that one is, in a way, even if one is repeating the name of God, there could be a sense that one is one with God, like that there is a sense in which there could be that sense as well. But this repetition of the name of God, or inquiry into the self, or whatever it is that the person is doing, is bringing the person into the present moment. They are leaving behind the past and the future, the different things, the different conditioned ways of thinking. If the person is more in a Buddhist bent, they may be more in the mindfulness tradition, and in that case they are observing themselves non-judgmentally. They are letting go of they're noticing their thoughts. They are coming out of these different types of experiences that are the past and the future, and they're leaving behind that sense of superficial identity and identification with my name, my job, who I am, my relationships. They're letting that go in favor of this observing of themselves, this deeper consciousness. And when we go to that observing place, what happens is, and we focus ourselves, what happens is we get a sense of that these things are more superficial, passing thoughts, and that there's a deeper self inside of us. And that experience, and then it can lead to a very deep absorption and a sense of unity with everything, and a sense of, and brings us into those territories that are described, and sometimes as this becomes more habitual, there's these deeper descriptions of how we have found the Atman, the true self, the soul, and how ultimately the deeper we go into Atman and the focus in Atman, we realize that Atman is Brahman, is the ultimate, and this deep absorption in that. And so it seems, we could seem to have this very clear pathway in the Hindu, and some, I'm using some Buddhist references as well, but this very clear pathway in the more popular methods of meditation to finding peace, serenity, and the true meaning of life. It seems to be very obvious how to do this from a Hindu perspective. And that's really the gift of the Eastern meditations, is this gift of the clarity about what we're trying to say. Like we're trying to say something about leaving behind the trappings of the external world and then finding something deeper inside. And so it's this type of understanding here. So I think that shows something what we're trying to do. And so I feel like, and then people understandably, when they find freedom from their mind, from the thoughts that burden them, they wish to communicate this freedom to other people. And how do I share that with others? How do I show them that deep fulfillment? And so that's something that motivates people to try to share these meditations with other people, do that. And even in a therapeutic context, there could seem to be great benefits to, being able to observe the thoughts, be free of the thoughts, let go of the false narratives, and find that deeper freedom. So that's one thing that goes on from a Hindu perspective. And the thing also is that many times, so for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a sense, Krishna describes, there's the sense that God is, the true self of all beings. There's a sense that intrinsically the nature of all beings is God. And so that is this deep sense of this, and this is expressed even in the Upanishads, where there is one of the Upanishads talking about, there's a dialogue, and there's a famous line in this dialogue which says "Tat Tvam Asi," which means you are that. And so the essential thing that's going on is that there is in the Hindu tradition this sense that you are, if you leave behind if you focus your mind, leave behind the past and future, notice your thoughts and go beyond them, you will find the stillness within, and you will realize that you are that. You are the stillness. You are that. A deep absorption makes you realize in your heart that you are God, and you find that union with God. And so that is the understanding in the Hindu tradition. And so this also means that there is this sense in which there's this kind of overlap between the nature of all things, the nature of God, and the nature of the human person. They're all conceived of. There's a way in which these things are conceived of in some circles. There's obviously some differences in some traditions, but it's generally these are conceived of as, there's a unity there. And so that's what I'm going to just leave as kind of the explanation of what the Hindu tradition is saying. And I think what it gives us is we're gonna now say what we're trying to say as a Christian in light of that. And so the thing is that, there is an old English book which is called The Cloud of Unknowing. And in the book The Cloud of Unknowing, it says, put all the things in your life under a cloud of forgetting, and then with a single prayer of longing, knock on the cloud of unknowing. So, what does that mean? And how does that very unclear two phrases, how will that bring clarity to what we can learn from this dialogue between Hindu and Christian thinking? What it shows us is something interesting, because it shows us that there is definitely in the tradition of Christian contemplation this necessity of letting go of, the external trappings of the world. Christ himself teaches he says, when you pray, go into your inner room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And so we have this sense of, very much like, very much in line with what is being said in that description we had of the Hindu tradition. There is that sense of, okay, like you want to let go of the trappings of the external world. You want to shut the door. You want to put these things under a cloud of forgetting. You want to forget about the external trappings of your life. You want to let go of past and future and your shopping list. These are the things that we don't bring these things into contemplation. We take off our shoes at the door. It's like, you leave them down by there. You go in the house. So there's this sense in which there is an overlap here. And so what's really powerful and beautiful about this description and the language that the cloud of unknowing gives us, it says to put these things under a cloud of forgetting. What's really powerful is that this language shows us the difference in understanding between what the Christian tradition is saying, what the Hindu tradition is saying. And the cloud of forgetting in the Christian tradition serves as kind of a foundation. If you want to imagine the Christian contemplation like a plane flying between two sets of clouds, maybe one layer is lower and one's higher. It's interesting because if we want to understand the deep absorption that we're experiencing in the Hindu meditation, it would be like that plane flying in a cloud. And that is that deep experience that feels like Atman is Brahman. That's where that's happening. And we understand even in the language of self-realization in the East, we realize that in the contemplation of the East, the cloud of forgetting serves as a cloud of remembering. This is why we could talk about self-realization, this sense of deep absorption, this sense of, imagine that plane flying in the cloud and everything is white, everything is or grayish, whatever you're going to see when you're inside a cloud in a plane. It's this deep sense that everything is one. And that's exactly what we experience when we go deeply into the Eastern meditations. Go into the cloud of, we put everything, it's very similar to, I think, put everything under a cloud of forgetting, but it's more like, okay, and then you fly. It's like you go up, it's like going up from the ground. You say, okay, I'm not going to be on the ground anymore. I'm going to leave behind the thoughts of the world, and I'm going to go up into the clouds. You're in the clouds. And so it's this sense in which, and again, there's this sense in which a lot of times, like this Cloud of Unknowing book is very, very obscure. There's a sense in which this project of flying is much more evident in these popular expressions of the Eastern traditions, the Eastern faiths, whereas Christians have not specialized yet in being able to explain their method, their message to the culture. And so we kind of need each other. We need each other to tell each other different things, to remind us what it's all about to be human and to go as deep as we can go into the human experience. We need each other. And so here's the thing. So you kind of have that experience of, the cloud of, so that's what's going on. We have the cloud of like that experience of stillness and that experience of unity as Atman, as Brahman. We have that is being in the cloud of forgetting as a goal. However, the Christian tradition takes a different approach. There's this way in which we could say that we are made in the image and likeness of God. But the Christian tradition does not say Tattvam Asi. You are that. It says you are made in the image of that. You are made in the image and likeness of that. But you're not that. And that's the difference in the Christian tradition. And the experience. So for example, there's this understanding that there's this difference between that God and his creation are radically different, but also that God wants to dwell in his human creature. It's a different setup than what we have in the Gita, where we have the sense that, okay, I am devoted to God, but God is my true self. It's more of a sense of, I am devoted to God who is not me, but God wants to dwell inside of me and be deeper than myself in me. It sounds very similar, but it's a different understanding. There's this understanding that, the light of our mind in the East is understood to be the light of God. Like the awareness itself, the consciousness, is seen as the very light of the divine. Whereas there is this other nature that is seen as divine in the Christian tradition, which we know, we don't necessarily see it. I mean, sometimes in the Eastern Catholic or Eastern Orthodox tradition, there are some traditions where they claim to be able to experience this in some way. But the experience is one of where Jesus says, pray to your Father who is in secret. It is by knowing that there's something more that we engage with this reality in some way, even when we don't experience it. And by believing that something is there, we then invite it to become present to us. And so, whereas, in the tradition of the East, we repeat the mantra to transcend the mind, to transcend the mind, like by going into that stillness and that, cloud of remembering, so to speak. In the Christian tradition, we are believing that something else is there, and so the way in which we are reaching out with even if we are praying in a very similar method with a contemplative method, the cloud encourages us to use a single word, even just like a mantra, in a way, but the intent is different than the mantra, because the intent is not only to transcend the mind and realize the unity of everything and the stillness. The thing is to reach out in love, to love, humility, contrition, any of those things. If we have any of these traditions of praying a short prayer, there's a relational aspect which is different, because it's not conceiving of the process as self-realization. It's conceiving of the process as a union of two, and a participation in the life of the Trinity. And so there is this other type of experience, which is it's a similar structure to, but we're saying a word, we're saying a phrase, but the phrase is not directed toward the mind. We're just transcending the past and the future. The phrase is designed to be an offering. It's designed to be in the context of the sacramental life of the church. It's designed to essentially be both to have all these other elements attached to it, and this other kind of a life. Now, again, remember, most Christians are not doing this, so we need our Eastern brothers and sisters to be encouraging us to speak their language, to encourage us to that, and to encourage us toward the practice of meditation. We need their encouragement, and we need to be able to speak with them, and that's what we need. And then I feel like there are elements that Christians can share with those who are practicing Eastern meditations in order to add some to share something of value. So this approach is not one where it says that everybody has, where it says that it's not one of. It's one that, of course, I'm coming at this from a Christian perspective, from a Catholic perspective. So I would say that the ultimate, of course, I wouldn't be in my own tradition if I didn't say that my own tradition gave me that fundamental context for these things. But I also, having come from these other traditions, I've experienced, in some ways, I've been able to have experience in these traditions, these other traditions in the East. And also, there's ways in which I feel like there's this way of, how do the presentation of the Eastern methods help us really, allow us to really experience the riches of life. And this dialogue between the traditions gives us this much greater ability to share what is valuable. And so again, so we have this experience of the cloud of this thing of we're calling on God, or we're repeating a mantra, repeating. So if I am repeating the name of, let's say I am in the Hindu tradition, I am repeating the name of God. This nama japa is, going to be leading me toward this union with God in myself, or in and as myself. And it's going to lead me into that place of Atman is Brahman and those kind of territories. Whereas in the Christian tradition, there's this sense in which God is another person. God is within me and is another person and has a body and has a historic reality, and and is present in the especially the Catholic tradition. We have this understanding that Christ is truly present in the Most Holy Eucharist, and in the sacred host, and in the bread and wine that have transformed and transubstantiated into His body and blood. So there's this sense in which Christ is within me, but there's this very variegated experience and this variegated reality of what this is. So there is this sense of, in the Eastern tradition, we might say, the phrase, "the kingdom of heaven is within you." From the Eastern tradition, that we would understand that as an experience of the true self, of self-realization. Whereas there is in the Christian tradition an understanding of almost like entering into the self and finding in there a family, and finding in their relationships, and finding in there a whole world of connections. And so it's very much, if we want to illustrate this, we could say the Eastern tradition is very much about ending the past and the future, and coming into the moment. Whereas in the Christian contemplation, there's this sense in which the cross is then planted there. Yes, we are to put everything under a cloud of forgetting, but then we pray in this relational manner, and we, knock by faith, on the cloud of unknowing. We can't see God directly, but we do have this quasi-experiential knowledge when we are engaging in the practice of prayer in this very deliberate way. And so, what are we really saying here? In the East, we say, okay, we want to overcome reincarnation and karma by overcoming our conditioned habits and releasing that karma so that we come into the knowledge of our true self, and the bonds of karma are burnt away. In the Christian tradition, we are saying something very similar. We're saying this in a different kind of a context. We're saying, not only that it's not the fire. We don't believe it's the fire of the created light of our own consciousness that burns those bonds of what we would call sin. We believe it is this participation in the life of the Trinity. It's not merely this zeroing. Instead of a zeroing out, it's a sense of a participation in love. And so it becomes this sense, when we are, we see that when we choose, these low things, we choose different things that we do wrong, we choose these different lower things in our experience, that we have, we have become less in the image of God. We have not lived up to what we are meant to be. And so Christ, by, in this kind of cosmic empathy, has allowed his whole being to empathize prayerfully and actively in the crucifixion with all these kind of this death that is, all these ways in which I have killed the image of God in myself by acting like an animal, or all the ways in which I have killed the image of God in myself by acting like a devil. So it's like this way in which he has in his body done this kind of there is in the there's this way in which he has kind of broken himself to heal the brokenness of all the acts that all people have done, that he has in his consciousness, his awareness is able to experience all the pain, the suffering, and to experience that and to kind of go through that himself so that everything can be healed. That's the understanding of the crucifixion. And it's this deep sense that, it's not a sense of which, okay, God kills his son because he wants to kill us. That's a bad way of thinking about it. Sometimes we can get these bad impressions of the Christian tradition from our upbringing. What instead is happening is that there is, in order to become infinite, one needs to be participating in the infinite. And so the infinite, and so since we have this understanding in the Christian tradition of like that there's much to say about this, but like this understanding that we have fallen short. We have sinned. We need somebody to bring to like a defibrillator. It needs this ability to enter into, again, an infinite love that will allow us to exist forever, and an infinite honoring of that love. That we like, that infinite love deserves to be infinitely honored. And so it's this sense in which the sacrifice is about this kind of infinite experience, this infinite offering, that we become participants in this priestly offering of Christ. And so we're called into his love, into his very being, and into receiving the sacred host, the Eucharist and stuff, so that we can become part of him physically. And so what happens in this understanding is that when we enter into this whole other life of the Trinity and this sacrifice and the sacraments, we come to understand that what we're entering into is the life of God, the dynamic life of God. So whereas in the Hindu tradition, we have a very beautiful way of understanding how to experience this experience of Advaita. Whereas in the Christian tradition, we're experiencing, it would be, I don't know how you would say it in Sanskrit, but the Trinity. You're experiencing the life of the Trinity, or a sense of non-duality. And so the thing is, these are different experiences. However, it's like, without hearing how the Hindu tradition works, it's like the technique, so to speak, that we could talk about the experience of the life of the Trinity falls on deaf ears. A modern person is usually, they kind of just hear, okay, this idea, okay, Christ died for my sins. Some people may respond to that on a deep level. But the thing that I think gives us so much more depth is this ability to live a vibrant spiritual life in Christ, to live a life in him. And so the thing is, these are not merely like, okay, you're a member of my church. That's not what living in Christ is. In Christ means to actually be united to his person, to actually be united to his love for the Father, to be his body literally, to eat his body literally, to experience, to make one's personal history united to his personal walk on earth. So that if I am noticing, let's say if I'm practicing mindfulness, I may notice my hand, and I may experience the sensation of my hand and leave behind the past and the future. Whereas if I am doing this as a contemplation, if we're doing that more in a Hindu way, I'll be understanding, okay, my true self is the awareness of my hand, But I mean, there are distinctions, there are distinctions in how a Buddhist would understand the experience of awareness versus how a Hindu would understand the experience of awareness. So the Buddhist is more, I'm paying attention, and I'm not really a person, but somebody's paying attention. It's more like the act of paying attention is emphasized. Whereas in the Hindu tradition, it's understanding that awareness is your true self. That's more of that. But if I pay attention to my hand, I leave behind past and future, and I experience my hand, and I'm here and now, and I can find some peace there. Whereas if I am doing this if I'm taking this kind of technique, and I'm through this dialogue that we're having, finding the riches of the Christian tradition through it, allowing this process to illuminate the riches of the Christian tradition, allowing that to be given back to the world through that, we can experience, I can pay attention to my hand and then think about the fact that Christ took on flesh. That is this divinity that is other, that is not the nature of myself or the nature of creation, inserted himself into that. And so I can think on that and offer the merits of that, of the incarnation. And even if I think about my hand, I can say, okay, Christ's hand was a nail put in it for, he wanted to suffer so that that brokenness in us could be healed, and those sins forgiven, that lack of love could be atoned for, and we could enter again into the life and sharing of love of the Trinity, and be brought into that through that physicality of the sacraments, and to the physicality of his death, and then live out the physicality of our sufferings for others in our family life, going to work day in, day out, and then of course in extraordinary ways where people do humanitarian things and go around and living that life and going back into that life and becoming part of that infinite life. I can think about, okay, my hand, I offer to the Father the sufferings of Christ and the pains of his hand as I pay attention. So my experience does not only end up in that, it doesn't end up in the cloud of forgetting. It doesn't only come into the moment, but it comes into the history of Christ, the life and the family of God. It goes through that door. It enters in through that door, and it goes further. It says, okay, so it's this thing where I believe that the riches that have been given to us, that have been provided for us, can be so illuminated by this dialogue between the Eastern meditation and that of Christianity, because it shows us what is really being said, what is really being spoken about in the sacraments. Because we could see, so for example, in the Hindu tradition, there is a sense of much more of a cyclical world. Sometimes, especially these traditional cosmologies, there's a sense of trying to escape the round of rebirth, or trying to these kind of Eastern concepts can give us a sense that the world is not making progress. The interesting thing is that in the Christian tradition, there is a deep sense that the world is going to make progress, and there's a sense in which the world itself will be restored. And so we could see in Christ this pattern of his resurrection, this pattern of the restoration of the world and the fulfillment of our hopes, so that our salvation is not only a nirvana or a moksha, it is actually the reuniting with our bodies in a different way. And so this is also why when we practice these kind of the disciplines of renunciation, in the Hindu tradition, there's a sense, or the Buddhist tradition, there's a sense that what we're doing is we are calming the passions and the feelings, the emotions, the impulses, until they calm down. Because the thing is, we don't need these things, in a sense, because the world is to be renounced. The world is to be renounced. The world is not fulfilling. Whereas what happens, so there's this sense of the removal of the passions, or the removal of the emotions, the impulses, the conditioning, so that we are then clear and at peace and in serenity and in the true self. Whereas in the Christian tradition, what we're trying to do is to purify, moderate, and integrate the passions, because we have a sense that God is, it's all bound up in the sense of that God is both man and God, and is present in the Blessed Sacrament, and is everywhere, and it's like this sense that, okay, the world is broken, and the world is in pain, and the world is not fully fulfilling, but yet the world will be renewed. And so there's this sense in which the passions are kept, and they are moderated and integrated through our prayer, because what we're trying to do ultimately is because we have a hope that our body will be fulfilled. And so it is this sense in which we have in the but the thing is the Hindu tradition, so for example, the Hindu tradition of sannyas, which is where people renounce the world, the disciplines of detachment. These are things that are forgotten about in the West. So the thing is, sometimes in the West, religion becomes superficial. It becomes, okay, I mean, there's this need that we have to recapture and to be inspired by that human virtue of our Eastern brothers and sisters, and we need to then move toward an understanding that the renunciation of the world is important, and it's also something where we have this hope where we're not banking on this world. Because sometimes we could just, okay, I go to church, I do this, that could be, those are very important things. But the thing becomes that we need to live this spiritual life so that we can have the moderation and integration of the passions and become all that we are meant to be as humans. That we can stand up against injustice with balance and clarity. We can we can enjoy the beauty of life and enjoying a beautiful meal with praise for God. It doesn't mean, and so we can do all these things in God, and so that is what we're trying to do. And so I guess I'm trying to explain different things, kind of maybe in an organic way, the differences between the traditions. And again, it all boils down to this difference in understanding that there is the sense in the Hindu tradition of, the cloud of forgetting becomes the cloud of remembering. But that the Hindu tradition and the Eastern meditations inspire us again to recapture, repackage, and explain the insights of the Christian tradition. And there's many people who have done this. And so this is some things, I'm just going to kind of close on this. There's a book, The Way of a Pilgrim, describes the Eastern Catholic approach to this. The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence describes some of this. There's a devotion called The Ceaseless Act of Love. Sister Consolata Betrone explains these type of things. There's almost this mantra-like meditation. But in this Christian context, these things are very useful. And so the thing is to understand that there is a richness that we gain through this dialogue of the traditions that allows us to discover the beauty of our cultures and the beauty of how we can speak to each other about the need to transform, and how we can. And again, the ultimate message of this is a message that makes everyone uncomfortable. It's a message that says, we've really fallen down on the job as Christians explaining our tradition. We've really failed to communicate it to the culture. And then it's also, and that the Eastern folks have done it better. And then it also says to the Eastern folks, yes, however, the problem is that there's a fixation here. We're thinking that the cloud of forgetting is a cloud of remembering. We're getting stuck there. There's more to divinity. It's almost like, and this is maybe a way of the final thing I'm going to say, there's a way in which the understanding in the Hindu tradition of God and self is kind of like a glass. And in a way, it's like the understandings of divinity and the understandings of our true self is like this beautiful clarity and this infinite, infinite clarity. But I believe that, we're pointing a lot to this union of natures, of God and self. And it's like there's this sense in which the Christian understanding of God is like the water to be poured into the glass. So it's like there's this expertise in discovering that we are glass in the East, but there's a necessity to now open the glass so that it can receive the water of the West. And so it's like, it's to make sure that we don't get fixated in understand. It's to make sure that when we let go of ourselves, that we don't think we've found God yet. And so that's the difference of these traditions, and how the dialogue can truly illuminate the project of human transformation and allow us, if we enter into this dialogue with receptivity to each other and a deep desire to seek the truth, how we can find the way to share to really share the fullness of life, and to really share these gifts, and especially this gift of, we want this gift of the life of true love, because yes, we are infinite. We are infinite, but we are created and infinite. And so the thing is that we don't want, because just like if you have a line, in geometry, you have a dot, and then the line goes off to infinity. That's like us, we're like that. But God is like that line that goes in both directions. And so the thing is, we don't want to find a kind of infinity that is beautiful, but inside ourselves, when we could have so much more. That is the thing we wish, and that's the thing, is that the desire that I'm trying to communicate in this is that we all enter into the life of Christ, that we enter into the life of the family of God, that we feel that it's almost like, if you imagine, like almost like entering into a pool where there's all these people are in the pool with you. It's kind of like we can have the experience like in the cloud of forgetting as remembering, and be like, it's almost like we're kind of going underwater and kind of being in silence, and kind of, if we go to nirvana, we're kind of drowning ourselves in there. But there's this other thing of like, we can go into the pool, and then look at all these people having a pool party, And that's like the kingdom of heaven in the life of the Trinity. We are leaving the heat of the beach and the sun that is too hot, but we're going into the pool, and then we're finding community there. And so that's what we're trying to say, is to enter into community, to have not to have, yes, there's a certain kind of experience of Advaita and that kind of non-duality, but then there's an experience of union that's just different. And so that is what I'm trying to speak about. And that is the message of the gospel, the message of the kingdom of heaven, and the message of the church, and the message of the sacraments, and the message of these things, which are so often obscured. It's the entering into a dance of life, a dance of the sacrifice, a dance of the sacraments. And that's what's trying to be said in the Christian tradition. It's trying to say, how do I live in a person who died for me? How do I receive his love? How do I live out his love? How do I become part of him? How does everything I do remind me of him? How do I make myself like him? And how do I enter into the dance of life in its fullness, and enter into that which is the sacrifice in Christ, and all the interactions of the church, and all the work in the world, and all these things? How do I enter into this dance? And that's what is trying to be said. That's the gospel. That's the good news, that we are called away from a life of alienation into a life of that deep communion. So that is, those are some things that I'm trying to communicate in this, and how this dialogue between what we're saying, the Hindu and the Eastern religions, and what I'm saying about the Catholic and Christian tradition can illuminate for us. So I thank you for listening to this, and I hope that this has blessed you today.